Hi everybody, I'm Jack, the Rambling Raconteur, and I finished reading the Metamorphoses of Ovid just a few minutes ago. I've been thinking about it pretty intensely the past 2 weeks. So the Metamorphoses, it's absolutely fantastic. I love it. I've got some ideas of how I want to reread it when I reread it, probably next year. It is an absolute masterpiece as a classic. It is an incredible poem. It's an incredible book about human interactions, about like etiologies across the natural world, and just a truly fascinating look at human thought and human interactions. I really really enjoyed it. When I read the Metamorphoses, what I did was there are 15 books that comprise up this like large poem cycle. And what I did was I read one book each day, and I tried to read it kind of in like a continuous sitting. So I tried to kind of, they would range from about 30 to 50 pages, and so I would try to have a time where I could just sit and read through that entire book and sort of get a sustained effect of Ovid. And if I wanted to look anything up, I'd look those up, maybe look back, look at a couple of pages or passages, and then put it away and return to it the next day. And I really enjoyed sort of that pace of dipping into Ovid but dipping out and reading some other stuff at the time. There's I think it's Edgar Allan Poe in his Theory of Poetry, where he makes this long 20-page argument about how great epic poems are not actually that great, and shorter poems are better because you don't get a sustained effect that reaches a height. It ebbs and flows, and that's Poe's idea. But I do find that I think if I tried to blast through 637 pages of Ovid, I would not have had the same level of enjoyment that I did reading it across 2 weeks. So I wanted to share a couple of brief thoughts on the Metamorphoses. The first is that there are a lot of passages that deal with violence, and specifically sexual violence. So a number of the Metamorphoses Ovid talks about are caused by Jupiter's the primary perpetrator, but Phoebus Apollo is not far behind in just practically anything that moves that could be attractive is better be ready to run for its life from Jupiter and Apollo. And it's interesting reading that now, and wondering, okay, what would it have been like reading this in the last century BC or the first century AD, in the first 200 years that this poem existed? What would that have been like? And Ovid seems to not necessarily just make it the gods are going to do what gods are going to do. He has an interesting way of pointing out that the gods are not all powerful. He continually will contrast their desires with the fates and point out that gods aren't all powerful, but he also has just this interesting way where it doesn't feel like he feels like he's sympathizing more with the victims of the gods and trying to find ways to, even when he points out, look, this great constellation we have, or this great flower we have, or this really interesting bird we have, comes from this incident of violence, usually against women. He's very clear about pointing out like that doesn't really make up for it, and the tree is still crying, the bird is still calling someone that it misses, and that type of violence is not good. Like Metamorphoses, like these changes and growth from violence are not necessarily, it doesn't make up for the violence, doesn't make it good. So I thought that was an interesting attitude and sensibility that I found throughout the writing. Another thing that jumped out was Ovid famously, my first interaction with Ovid was through the Amores and through sort of his more like love poems, which I deeply love, I totally appreciate. I think they're fantastic. This was a different sensibility. There's a lot of love, but there's a different sensibility. Some of it was very violent. In, I think it's books 5 and 6, he has Perseus, after Perseus famously like slays Medusa and then uses the head to start just her head to whip the Kraken and rescue Andromeda. and all these good things. When Perseus has his wedding after that, his wife's former suitor starts saying like, whoa, you stole my wife. And they're like, wait a second, he rescued her. Like, you didn't do anything. And so there's a scene of violence at that wedding that makes Homer's Iliad and Odyssey look not quite as incredible as they truly are. I mean, it was interesting to find Ovid's as capable of writing scenes of such like physical human violence, analogous to what we see in the famous wedding scene at the end of the Odyssey or throughout the Iliad. That was just a real eye-opening experience. Another note, I wanted to read a passage from Orpheus and Eurydice, and it kind of gets at some of the ideas around Ovid. So, Hymen, the god of the marriage feast, in his robes of saffron, flew from Crete through the measureless sky to the land of the Thracian Cicones. Orpheus was calling the god to his wedding, though all to no purpose. The god attended for sure, but the ritual words, the joyful faces, and omens of favor were sadly missing. Even the torch in his hand kept sputtering smoke, brought tears to the eyes but never ignited, however strongly he waved it. The outcome was even worse than foreshadowed. The newlywed bride, while taking a stroll through the grass with her band of attendant naiads, suddenly fell down dead with the fangs of a snake in her ankle. When Orpheus, the Thracian bard, had indulged his grief to the full in the air above, he felt he must also appeal to the shades, and dared to descend to the river Styx through the Taenarian gateway. And so he makes his way to hell, and he starts singing this song, unravel the web of my dear Eurydice's early passing. We all are destined for you, speaking to Hades, the rulers of Hades. We may tarry a little, but sooner or later we speed to our one habitation. This is the place that we all are bound for, our final dwelling, and yours is the longest reign that the human race must endure. Eurydice, too, when her due of years has been ripely completed, shall own your sway. Till then, I beg you to let me enjoy her. If fate forbids you to show my wife any mercy, I'll never return from Hades myself. You may joy in the deaths of us both. As Orpheus pleaded his cause, enhancing his words with his music, he moved the bloodless spirits to tears. For a moment, Tantalus ceased to clutch at the fleeting pool. Ixion's wheel was spellbound. The vultures halted their pecking at Tityus' liver. The Danaids dropped their urns, and Sisyphus sat on his boulder. The Furies' hearts were assuaged by the song, and the story goes that they wept real tears for the very first time. What? Wow! The shots fired at every poet ever. And I think that's the majesty of Ovid, is he takes these ideas of music and song, and then he puts them in such a human and humane perspective. And this idea of appealing to death, not in the Orpheus and Eurydice legend of Orpheus is just going to like play music and just get everybody to like feel for him. But he makes these rational arguments around, look, I'm going to be back here one day. My wife is going to be back here one day. Can't we have a little bit more time? Like the rationalizations, the way in which Ovid approaches grief is just absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely astounding. And then the way he lists like the different people who are being tortured throughout Hades, throughout hell. And he lists like Sisyphus sitting on his boulder. Like the imagery is absolutely fantastic. And I think for me, this is a mind-blowing poem. It's one I want to return to and look at again, in part because of passages like that. Like that's something that I can't get out of my head. When I was hiking, yesterday and the week before, when I would see large rocks, I would think, okay, I want to go sit on that boulder like Sisyphus. Not that I want to ever be Sisyphus, but that type of approach. And so throughout the book, we get a huge survey of Greek myth, Roman myth. It's with the Roman names. So we see Jupiter, not Zeus, Juno, not Hera, Venus, not Aphrodite. But it's absolutely incredible. Now, I will say that it is incredibly dense as well. This edition is a verse translation by David Raeburn, and there's extensive notes. There's almost 100 pages worth of notes that help explain certain references Ovid makes, both historical references and mythological references. But if you've read, and I grabbed copies, Homer's Iliad, Homer's Odyssey. If you've read the Aeneid by Virgil, I'm sorry, but once you've made it past the Dido of Carthage sections, you're good. If you've read those, you have a base in which to approach a work like the Metamorphoses. As much as I would say the Metamorphoses are far more enjoyable to read than the Aeneid, I think that having read the Aeneid, you're able to appreciate the Metamorphoses so much more. So that was one quick note I wanted to make. I wanted to read one more passage. I thought it was fascinating. So Ovid keeps listing all of these Greek and sort of like Western Asia, like Turkey, Sidon, modern Lebanon, Syria, modern Turkey, the Phrygians. He keeps listing all of their myths, and he digs into Crete. We get like Minoan myths, but he has a pair of really incredible sections I want to jump in on. And these are in the final book. So he's had 14 books of just all these myths, and he finally gets right at the end, the final third, he gets to the Trojan War, and he lists how brave the Trojans were, but how brave the Greeks were, and how Aeneas, a descendant from Troy, founds Rome, and therefore the Romans are connected to the Trojan War and very much following the Virgilian narrative. But then he gets into this really weird, like left field slide, where he starts talking about Croton in over on Italy, Sicily, that area, a town, and he talks about, this was founded by Greeks, and here's how, and here's why, and he suddenly brings Pythagoras into the poem as this philosopher, and he has Pythagoras say, I'm the reincarnation of this Trojan, but then this is what he jumps into. My vessel is launched on the boundless main, and my sails are spread to the wind. In the whole of the world there is nothing that stays unchanged. All is in flux. Any shape that is formed is constantly shifting. Time itself flows steadily by in perpetual motion. Think of a river. No river can ever arrest its current, nor can the fleeting hour. But as water is forced downstream by the water behind it, and presses no less on the water ahead, so time is in constant flight and pursuit, continually new. The present turns into the past, and the future replaces the present. Every moment that passes is new and eternally changing. You see how the night that has measured its course moves on to the day, and the radiant beams of the sun then follow the blackness of night. And he builds this theme of metamorphosis, of change, of how everything about the universe and nature and life is about change. And so he's listed 14 books of poetry of people changing and of people being changed and transformed by divine power, or by divine mercy in some sense. And now he starts this whole thing around, change is sort of the only constant of the universe. And it's this beautiful encapsulation and sort of like neatly tying up every theme we've been experiencing. And then he goes one farther. He starts to list all of these cities he's been talking about: Troy, Mycenae, Argos, all of these different places, and then he starts to list like none of these are here anymore. They're all gone, and he points it towards it's Rome has replaced all of them. Rome is in power over all of these, but you have this sense of Ovid having just said everything is changing. The whole point is change. That he understands that Roman civilization will also change. That the republic that has become an empire, a sense of change, is not going to be an empire on top of the world forever. And he never makes that explicit. He ends with the apotheosis of Julius Caesar and this whole comparison of Augustus to Julius Caesar is as Jupiter is to Saturn, is as Achilles is to Peleus, as Agamemnon is to Atreus. And he has this whole list. But you get this sense of Ovid understanding at the zenith of this incipient empire. I shouldn't say zenith. The zenith would have been 100 years later under the final expansions under Trajan. But at this incipient empire that appears to be on top of the world, Ovid understands it's impermanent, it is not going to last. And it was just a beautiful way to sort of end 600 pages of wildly fantastic verse. So I really really, really enjoyed this. Like I said, it is a bit different from what Ovid's written before in terms of it felt much closer to his Heroides, which are these letters from different, most of them deal with letters from men, sad that they're, men and women, sad that they can't be with each other, and sad that they're leaving. Aeneas and Dido are within this. But so that felt a little bit closer than the Amores. Some of the weird declamation speeches felt a little bit like Pindar's Odes. In terms of the history, you feel like Ovid had not only read Virgil and was aware of Virgil, but also has some sense of being aware of some of Livy's writings, especially with the final books 14 and 15. Some of the ideas around Romulus and Numa feel very close to what Livy is telling in his early histories. And then, of course, that just fabulous ending with Pythagoras brings to mind the Penguin Classics have a great volume of the Greek sophists that deal with Heraclitus, whose idea of a man can never walk through the same river twice because the river will have flowed past, the man will have changed, and so that concept of change being ever present. I wore my Bryce Canyon shirt because the hoodoos are formed by change. They erode to form an arch, and then the center breaks, and then you have the hoodoo pinnacles. And so I just wanted to be in the theme with Ovid. So that's Ovid's Metamorphoses. Thank you if you've watched. If you've ever read this, let me know if you liked it or not. I hope you did. This is fantastic. So this was my big contribution for my own mind for National Poetry Month. So thank you, everyone.